So welcome to our session. This is Mary Moore from iFishiBelong. Eric Johnson from Trout Routes is also joining us, and this is Navigate Trout Routes Like a Pro. Some of you folks may have attended one of the iFishiBelong fish and hangs that we've recently had. We had some opportunities to use trout routes during those activities. If not, and this is your intro or you've been around and using it before, welcome, and we're excited that you're here. Quick overview of what we're going to be covering today, quick introductions from Eric and myself. I'll spend a few minutes highlighting iFishiBelong and what we do, why we're here. And then we're going to dig into the meat of it. Eric is going to walk us through mapping resources that are out there, why they're important on your fishing adventures, and what Trout Route brings to the table to really help you navigate smart while you're out there on the water finding new fish. So myself, Mary Moore, as I mentioned, I am based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Right now, I'm actually sitting in my van outside of the Yellowstone River. I can see it from my door, south of Lake Livingston. I was at the Montana Fish and Hang a few weeks ago, and will slowly make my way back to Pennsylvania over the next couple weeks. Originally from Oklahoma, grew up in Oklahoma City, and I lived in the Twin Cities for several years when I first graduated out of undergrad from University of Oklahoma. I have one adventure partner, Dan, my husband, who just went back home a few days ago. So he is waiting for me to come home, and maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'll see. Two dogs. I have one with me, Dakota, and Ranger is at home. Enjoy snow adventures as much as water adventures, and a lonely cat that always gets left at home. I always feel bad for her. So fly fish maybe only about 5 years ago in Central PA. We spent a lot of time on the small streams looking for native brookies, but have discovered the big rivers in Montana and Idaho and Wyoming, and love to come out here and learn new things every time I do. I'm a founding board member of iFishiBelong. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then in my, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday world, I'm a product leader in software and data analytics, mostly focused in the health technology space. So that's myself.
Good evening, good late afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm always excited to have these conversations because it's a really cool opportunity to get to know some folks and connect with people who are in different fishing communities than I am. I'm calling in tonight from Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, just outside of the fabled Driftless region. Overlooking a flooded park on the Mississippi. It's a beautiful night, and I hope the red-winged blackbirds that are just off the screen here don't cause too much commotion. I grew up in the Twin Cities, so shout out Twin Cities. We grew up in just outside of Minneapolis. And my wife and I just moved out here with our two boys about 3 weeks ago now, so a little bit of a change for us, but we're very excited to be here in Wisconsin with our three dogs, who are, along with our two boys, out routes about a year and a half as part of the core team. And if you've been following along, we were actually just acquired by Onyx Maps. So we are now part of a slightly larger organization, that their team kind of across the board. I grew up I didn't grow up fly fishing. I grew up traditional fishing to the Driftless region. Very brief backstory of the Driftless is it's a part of the country that didn't get flattened by glaciers, so it has a lot of really cool elevation change and some beautiful trout streams that persisted through that last major geological period, and so it's a lot of really fun trout fishing, but it's sort of off the beaten path and a little bit unknown. So it's kind of one of those hidden gems across the country. And I'm excited to dig into trout routes here tonight.
So just a quick couple of slides on iFishiBelong and kind of what we do as a nonprofit organization. So we were actually formed at the beginning of this year to ensure that we're supporting all species, all angling techniques, and all people within the fishing industry, and more broadly in the angling community. You'll hear a lot about fly fishing. That's really kind of where we've been founded, but the organization's really been created to kind of encompass a much broader perspective from an angling standpoint. We're focused on a couple key areas. One is around leadership opportunities. So both elevating leaders in the fishing industry, as well as creating opportunities to cultivate new leaders within leadership opportunities, including training, etc. Also advocating for equal representation and making sure we just see ourselves in the angling communities, whether we're walking into fly shops, on the river, going to industry events, etc. Just being part of that angling community where we can, and around some of our specific programming, which I'll talk about, providing financial assistance that really creates access and awareness and exposure to the different areas of fishing that are available. And then finally, promoting access. You'll see lots of events that we hold just to bring communities to get together across the United States, as well as educational opportunities as well. So that's really our mission. I mentioned we were formed this year, but our programs, we've got three main programs, have all been active and have now kind of come together under the umbrella of iFishiBelong up to even more than a decade ago. So just a real quick overview of our three programs. First is the Becca Sue Klein All Kids Fish. This is based in the southern United States around Atlanta, and it's really about educating and exposing children to fly fishing, conservation, and environmental stewardship. So they held events each year, mainly kind of in urban areas like Atlanta. We're going to be kicking off one in Philadelphia, I think later this year, maybe next year, just to create that exposure and access to kids and fly fishing. And Dale Woodward, Beth, you mentioned her earlier. She is our program lead for All Kids Fish and that program. Ubuntu Fly Anglers is led by Bob Bartlett out of Spokane, Washington, and this is all about bringing together Black and brown fly anglers, educators, guides, and environmental activists, and again, just creating that community of folks to bring together. And I'll mention some of the events that they have. And then finally, United Women on the Fly. This was founded by Heather Hodson, who's the founder of iFishiBelong. It's been around for about a decade. Laura Murph now is our program lead for United Women on the Fly. And this is all about empowering and united women in fly fishing. Again, education and mentorship and conservation are all key to that program as well. So those are the programs that sit under iFishiBelong and really where we're focused in different communities in the angling area. Quick highlight of July and our events that are going on. Of course, this educational event around trout routes and how to become a pro. I mentioned Bob Bartlett and our Ubuntu Fly Anglers program. They will have their monthly On the Reel Instagram live show this Thursday with Scott Simmons. He's a Minnesota-based fly fishing guide. He's going to talk about his personal story of kind of being a DIY learn-as-you-go fly fisherman to now being a professional guide, and share some of his thoughts. And then I'll mention we have our last Fish and Hang in October in New York. So if you're East Coaster or feel like coming to the East Coast to catch some fly fishing action, we'll be coming together in October. But our scholarship opened for that event on July 1st, and it closes at the end of this month. So if you're interested in scholarship opportunities, check that out as well. That is ongoing in the month of July. As I mentioned, our Fish and Hang, so I just want to highlight this real quick. We'll be in Wilmington, New York. This will be our first time in New York. We were in Pennsylvania last year. As we actually met the organization. October 4th through the 6th. We'll also be having an educational workshop. We almost always kick off our Fish and Hangs on Fridays with an educational workshop of some sort. And this one will be about fishing New York North Country. And so it'll be really interesting. I have not fished in New York, so I'm very excited to learn some new things. So that's open, Reg open just a couple days ago for this. We have some opportunities to check out some private waters if that hasn't booked up yet. So check out that Fish and Hang as well. And finally, last thing, how to get involved. So a couple different things. If you're interested in participating in other educational events like this, we typically have a couple each month. I think on August 5th, we have another one. Now I can't remember what exactly is going to be happening there, but check out our events page. You can also get our newsletter, our email newsletter, and that'll highlight everything that's going on each month. There's some volunteer opportunities. We're a new organization, so there's several committees. 2 committee leads, one around communications and one around our volunteer coordinator, particularly, are open. But volunteering for the All Kids Fish events or to help kind of coordinate some of these events. Always looking for folks to come and be part of the organization and be volunteers. And finally, following us on Instagram, Facebook, and all the antics of what's going on in the organization. We'll also keep you up to date on all the events in the Instagram Live. So those are ways you can get involved in iFishiBelong. I'll pass it along to Eric.
Fantastic. So what I would like to do this evening is jump into sort of an overview of some mapping resources that are out there and touch on why we need them in the first place. I think there's an awful lot of data around fishing for trout, for other species, and I think sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to understand why some of them are important. So we're going to touch on some resources in general, and I'm going to use the state of Montana as sort of my example, and then we're going to dive into how trout routes bring some of that data together and how it can be a more powerful resource by combining some of that information. But in general, maps and other navigational resources do a lot for us. They help us find where that moving water is or where that water and access points are. So of course you're using them to find places to go fishing. They often will show you public land, so understanding where you can access that water is critically important, especially in some states across the country. They are great GPS navigation resources if you have them digitally on a GPS device or on your phone. Many of them will provide rules and regulations around what the access laws are for that area, what some of the species or some of the angling regulations are, depending on what kind of fish you're targeting. If you've got some old school paper maps, you've got some offline use right there. Plenty of other resources allow you to download maps and other resources so you have them in your pocket, so you don't need to have cell coverage when you're out in the wild. And in some cases, they might even be somewhat interactive, so you could search for things within that resource. You can use them to combine some resources together to compare or contrast different data sets and things like that. When we start really digging into angling, we might be considering information like stream flows, or if you've ever ventured onto the USGS website and looked at their stream gauge data resources, you can gather all kinds of information about a particular waterway by understanding what the flow rates are, what the river heights might be, and even in some cases those gauges have thermometers on them, so you can be checking water temperature, which for a species like trout is critically important. And then there are a whole host of other resources around that water that can be useful as well. So things like the elevation profile, understanding if you're headed to some new stretch of water and you would like to have an idea of what the terrain might be around it, you can check elevation profiles to get a sense for that waterway before you get out there. And then to make some of that information more useful, you might be interested in taking notes or marking pins for you to explore later on, or if you find some more information and you want to make note of it, adding that to a map can always be very useful, or using these mapping resources as sort of your fishing log to take note or keep track of your time out on the water can be particularly important. So those are just high level why maps are super important. One of the reasons I got into mapping and geography many years ago was how much information and what kind of story a map can tell you. And so we're going to walk through some of these resources here to help us decipher what that information is telling you, because at first glance they can be awfully intimidating, and especially when you start combining data sets together, having a little bit of background information can be very helpful. So Mary, let's jump to that next slide, please. So like I said, I'm going to use the state of Montana as a reference point, and I'll comment on that a little bit later on, but Montana FWP has a whole host of resources. Many states across the country do a fairly decent job of providing anglers with resources that are free and publicly available. And so we're going to take a look at a few of these here. This first example that I touched on just in general on the last slide was access points. Knowing where you can access water is perhaps the easiest place to start, and using maps to help you do so makes the most sense to me. So in this case, we're looking at a map of an area, and you can, if you were to zoom in on that map on the left, you can see those fishing access icons. In this particular case, there is a little bit of interactivity. You can click into these icons and actually see the boat launch or the access point. And so if you are just kind of getting started, or if you're exploring a new area, this is one of the first suggestions I make to folks is use the access information that's available to you. And in this case, Montana does a pretty decent job of showing you the information and providing another resource for you that's helpful before you even get out onto the water. So access points here is the first one I wanted to mention. We are also going to take a look at some additional river data. I am going to use trout sort of as our baseline. Trout Routes, of course, is a dedicated app for moving trout water. So we are fairly focused on trout as a species for anglers. However, you can use our information as well as this information here to get a sense for angling opportunities in general and more broadly. But in the case of trout, quite a few states will stock fish in different parts of the state. So you can look at those resources to understand what the stocking history has been. Not in every case do stocked fish last an entire season, but in many cases they do. So having an idea of where fish have been stocked can give you a little bit more detail about some areas that you might be able to catch particular species. Many states will have quite a bit of survey data. State agencies will go out and shock rivers and collect fish species, measure them, write up that data, then present that back to the public so you can see what the health is like of those particular waterways. We touched on access points already. In many cases, you can see additional species info. So if you're looking at more than one species, you can find some more information there. And then in some cases, not all, but some states are starting to incorporate some of that river flow data into their state resources as well. So all of these things are things to consider when you're what I would term e-scouting. You're looking up new places to go fishing, and you're trying to collect as much information about that area as you can. This is a PDF of or one of the access guides. I mentioned access and regulations a little earlier on. Not every species or state allows you to fish for those species year round, so it's very important that you understand what the seasonality is of those fishing or fishing those regions. In this particular case, you have a downloadable PDF rather. Here in the upper Midwest, I know states like Minnesota and Wisconsin have quite a bit of these sorts of resources where if you dig a little bit and you have an idea of where you're already headed, you can oftentimes find these sorts of freely available resources to download ahead of time. In that particular case, you'd have that resource available to you offline. So they can be super helpful if you were looking for additional resources to carry with you. The downside, of course, is you aren't able to link that to your GPS. So while you could use it for navigation, you wouldn't have that blue dot on your phone necessarily to tell you where you are on that map. So it might require a little bit of extra knowledge about how to read maps or how to use them when you're in the wild. And then, limited detail in terms of being able to zoom in or out on those resources. And of course, not all of these are particularly mobile friendly. I don't know if you've ever tried to save a PDF and then figure out where your phone decided to save it for you. Sometimes it's in your photos. Sometimes it's in a files section, which I rarely use for anything else. So being able to backtrack to these resources can also be a bit challenging, but they are available, and certainly another excellent resource, if you're trying to find some free resources that are for, like I said, a new region that you're hoping to explore, or even a region you might be familiar with and you just want to have sort of that safeguard and that additional info in your pocket. So Montana FWP does a pretty decent job providing these resources. Like I said, the upper Midwest here in Wisconsin has great resources for that. And if I may back up for a moment, one of the easiest things to do when you're just starting out would be a simple internet search to find some of these resources. Quite often, if you were to plug something in like fishing for trout in Montana into a search query, you'll be directed right to these government agencies. And so something else to consider and take note of if you are interested in finding some more of these resources. That's one of the easiest ways to start tracking some of this information down. This is another data set that Montana FWP provides. This is the fish distribution map. This is also somewhat interactive. These links are here in the presentation, and Mary, you're more than welcome to share this with everyone after this evening. And I would encourage you to kind of poke around on these as well. In this particular case, this is showing you maps of trout streams and then color coding them by species distribution, so you can understand which kinds of fish you might be able to catch in these areas. Again, we're focused on trout here, but several state agencies will expand on this data to include warm water species or just about anything that you're looking to chase down. So Again, some states have better resources than others. Montana, like I mentioned, does a fairly decent job of providing this for you. But another one of those data sets that can be very useful, especially if you have identified an area or a region that you're interested in and you're looking to obtain some more information about that moving water. This is the Fishing Guide Mapper, another useful resource. You might notice a bit of a theme here. All of these are separate tools, and in many cases sort of require their own level of understanding. There's an awful lot of data baked into this particular tool set here. You'll notice that whole list on the left side of that image are all the different data sets that they bring in. You can turn them on and off. I've listed a few there on the left as well. So things like stocking locations, access sites, recreational land, different land designation. But again, it's another tool for you to have to become familiar with. And not all states are going to have this level of detail. They can be very helpful, but again, it looks a little bit crowded and might take a bit of a learning curve here to really get familiar. So other options are out there as well. I know here in the upper Midwest, there's a major mapping database that a lot of state agencies will use. So sometimes you can see how these things are, or how this information is connected. If you learn this particular fishing guide mapper tool, you might be able to translate that to a different state, but in more than likely, you'd have to sort of relearn. And I see this question here, is all this incorporated in trout routes? I'm going to hold that question. We're going to get into that down the road here. But excellent question, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. So, and I've alluded to this a little bit already, but you have some fragmentation of these resources. They're not all connected. In some cases, the different tools that are out there may or may not include all the data, so you might have to be bouncing back and forth between multiple tabs, or remembering where you found a certain set of information so you can come back to it later. Most of them are not particularly mobile friendly, and so that presents certain challenges. And then, of course, like I mentioned already, you don't have your live GPS or navigation functionality, so they're not particularly useful when you're out in the wild, which can pose several challenges. And in none of these tools that I was mentioning here, do you really have the ability to add notes or drop your own markers if there's a point of interest that you are particularly curious about that you wanted to save for later. You would have to almost do that in a separate tool. And I intentionally only used resources from Montana because in the case of those state resources, you're limited to just the state of Montana. If I was interested in heading to Idaho or Wyoming or Colorado or somewhere else, I would essentially have to find these resources again on that state agency or other mapping resources website. And so having to relearn these tools all over and over again can also certainly be challenging and frustrating if you're not inclined to spend quite a bit of time to sort them out. So let's jump into how we solve some of these problems with trout routes, and we can hop to the next slide here. So trout routes, and I wanted to mention this as well. We've been very, very pleased to be supporting partners of United Women on the Fly and now iFishiBelong for the last year and a half, and so we're very happy to be and still be connected with you all and supporting, especially Fish and Hang weekend experiences this year. So if you're interested in those experiences, we do offer a little bit of additional support, as well as helping you all get access to trout routes. But what we've tried to do with our mapping platform is incorporate every trout stream across the country, as well as many of these data sets as we possibly can. So to the question, Megan, that you asked a moment ago, do we incorporate these into trout routes? Yes, we do. We've pulled this information and as well as info from about 200 plus different data sets to essentially create a single platform that incorporates this data for you, so you don't need to keep learning new states or new regions. It's all at hand, and it's all functional in the same way, no matter if you're looking at Montana or Wyoming or Idaho or somewhere on the East Coast or the Midwest. It's all been standardized to help you become familiar with how the data is presented and then really utilize that information as well. So Like I mentioned, we've incorporated over 50,000 different trout streams across the country. We believe that's just about every trout stream that exists in the lower 48. And in addition, we overlay all sorts of information about public access, public versus private land, access points that we've been talking a little bit about. Those stream gauges are plugged in natively. And then you also have the ability to use it as your fishing log, add your own markers, your own pins, take notes, upload photos if you're interested. But it's all private to your account. So all the data within Trout Routes is curated by our team rather than being sourced from our users. So it's a private platform, and you can essentially rely on us to be providing the most up-to-date and accurate information for you. So let's dive into a couple of these features, and I can show you how we start to bring these resources together. So along with access points, understanding the different kinds of waters that are out there is very important, and it can be incredibly helpful. So what we've tried to do is not only map those access points for you, which are those blue icons, but we've applied our own classification system to those waterways. So at a glance, if you look at the phone image on the left, that's just every bit of water that has trout in it in that screenshot. And let's say I'm mostly interested in the water that's going to be either that has the most access, or has the healthiest trout populations, or has the best habitat. So what I've done is I've gone into the filters menu and I've just turned off everything except for gold medal and class 1 trout streams. So you can very quickly whittle down some of those fishing opportunities into the ones that are going to have more access opportunities and probably better fishing. And you can quickly see how, the sort of busy screen on the left goes down to about a dozen or so stretches of water to help you identify some places very quickly that are going to have good access and are going to hold some nice fish. So our stream classification system really helps you kind of sift through some of the noise, and especially for an area that you may be unfamiliar with, use those resources to your advantage to find some places that you know you can be successful on. So that's our stream classification system. In addition to Streamclass, we also allow you to apply a whole host of other filters to the data. So if you were to open up that filters menu, we plug in, 200 plus data sets is an awful lot of data. And sometimes it might be easier to filter things out that you aren't necessarily interested in and really focus on a handful of things to help you find those fishing opportunities. And so turning things off and perhaps only focusing on those gold medal or class 1 streams, or turning off dams and boat launches and only focusing on access points can really help you sort through the data. And this is, I think, one of the ways that really makes Trout Routes very powerful, because with a lot of those other data sets, there really isn't much of a way to filter down and isolate the things that you're looking for without being somewhat bombarded by all of that information. So being able to sort through and filter things is another one of those really critical elements, and one of those bits of or one of those tips that I like to suggest to help get the most out of that information. There's a question here about removing waterways that are closed per emergency regulations. We are working toward having more real-time fishing access updates. There, as you can imagine, having mapped the whole lower 48, there are an awful lot of waterways that have some of those seasonal regulations, and several of them, especially in the summertime, now that it's getting hot, may have some more of those quickly changing access rules and regulations. We don't have them in real time just yet. However, we have identified the agency or even the website that will give you that information. And so if you were to click into a stream and navigate to the access tab, more often than not, you'll be able to find a link right to the agency that's going to be managing that waterway, and that's where you'll be able to get the most up-to-date information. That's a great question. I wish we had some more staff to be able to moderate that sort of thing. In some cases, it's additionally tricky because not all of those agencies are going to have that posted digitally, so there really isn't a resource for us to tap into. And so we do everything we can to direct you to that agency if we aren't able to provide that real-time status update. But great question. Let's jump to public land layers. One of the cool features of trout routes that I think is really interesting is the number of fishing easements that we've been able to incorporate. So as you are looking at the base maps, you have the ability to change sort of the background that you see when you load the map. And one of those map modes is access. And so by turning on that map mode, you can see the screen on the top is the Montana FWP resource. And then what we've done on trout routes is highlighted that public land in purple. So you can very quickly tell where you can access that water. You can see that boundary that's following the streamline there that's showing you that you do have access to that area. As well as, and if you're able to tap into those polygons, you can get a little bit more information about what that is. So there's West Yellowstone National Park pulled up there on the screenshot on the right. Let's hop to that next slide there. Okay, so I touched on elevation profiles earlier. I wanted to dive into that a little bit to help us understand why that's important. So I'm looking at Rattlesnake Creek here just outside of Missoula, and grabbed a couple of photos for an area that's fairly close to where those red pins are on the map in those screenshots. So if you're looking at the elevation chart, which you can see on the screenshot on the bottom, you can see that that stream starts at around 7,000 feet. And by the time you get closer to Missoula, you're probably in the neighborhood of 3,500 or less. And so the elevation changes fairly dramatically. And what you can sort of assume from that is the characteristics of that river or creek or stream or whatever it may be. So, of course, intuitively, you have an area that changes its elevation very dramatically. You can probably assume faster moving water. You might think that there might be some more opportunities for small pockets behind boulders that might hold fish. In comparison to where the elevation is changing less dramatically, you might have some of those tailouts and some of that calmer, slower moving water. So in this particular case, we're able to combine the location of that elevation chart as well as the height of that elevation, so you can get a sense for how that water might be behaving. And this is a function that you're able to use on any of the rivers that we've mapped out. And so actually kind of a neat feature where if you scroll your finger along on the chart, that red pin will move across the stream, so you can see exactly where you are on the water as you're referencing that elevation chart there on the bottom. Quick question here on private property ownership details. If we, I'll jump back to that public and private land here real quick. We currently do not incorporate the landowner names. However, we are bringing in some of that information via the Onyx Maps team very shortly. One of the things we're trying to do is decide how much of that information we want to incorporate. If you are looking at fishing opportunities, you probably don't really need to know the land ownership information for a ranch in the middle of nowhere that doesn't have any moving water flowing through it. So right now we're kind of combing through the data so that we don't just dump in a bunch of unnecessary information and cloud up the map. So we're trying to be very mindful of how we bring that information in, but it is coming. And so very shortly here, I expect us to have the ability to display that private land ownership information. Now, that being said, we still incorporate about the same amount of public versus private land in terms of color coding the base maps. So while you might not be able to see the landowner information that you might have if you were to open up another Onyx product, you could still tell whether or not the land is public or private. So we made sure to incorporate that across all the streams across the country because that, like I mentioned earlier, is very very critical depending on what states you're in. Making sure that you're on public land or on public water is incredibly important, and so we made sure that we incorporated that across the country. So we just don't quite go down to the detail of land ownership information just yet. It's on its way, and in the meantime, you still have access to an equal amount of public versus private land data. But excellent question. We've touched on regulations a little bit on that emergency closure question. This is a little bit more detail what that looks like. So I mentioned different map modes earlier. We have another map mode for regulations here. And so this is what that looks like. If you were to turn on that map mode and pull up the legend, you can see based on the legend here, you have all sorts of different regulations for those waterways. So just like our stream classification system, you can very quickly at a glance see that you have some waterways that have no special regulations, some that have very special regulations, some that have other restrictions, or may even be closed to fishing outright. As well as if you were to tap into the stream, we also make note of what those regulations are for that particular body of water. And then if you're still looking for more information, we'll direct you to the agency that manages that water and provide you with that link so you can track that information down even more directly. Another helpful way, once you've identified an area that you might be interested in fishing, providing more detail and more information about that waterway, and then more resources to make sure that you'll have the right resources and the right tools when you get out there, and to be sure that you're fishing properly. A couple of other questions here. Let's see, let me touch on this one here on private land boundaries. So Beth, to your question, yes, we do have the public versus private land boundaries. In the screenshot we have here on the Streamflows card, or slide rather, if you look closely, you can see the green highlighted areas. That's public land, and everything else in that sort of tan beige is all private land. So you can see that there are distinctions between the public and private land there. And as you were to zoom in, you can see even more detail on that. Another question here just on the relationship with Onyx. So we were acquired in March, and Onyx is developing a fishing product. However, they're focusing mostly on still water, and right now it's limited to just one state. I think the state of Minnesota is what they've mapped out and they've released. So Trout Routes will remain a separate fishing platform for the foreseeable future. I would expect at least through 2025. But what that means for us is that we get to continue to develop even more significantly for trout anglers. And it is still a little bit up in the air as far as how we may or may not be incorporated into another Onyx product. So yes, we are still separate. That being said, we do have a number of cross promotions happening this year. So if you're a member of Onyx Hunt and you're interested in Trout Routes, we've got a couple of sales coming up. And then, like I mentioned, we do offer a discount to iFishiBelong members as well. So excellent question, Ellen. Thank you for bringing that one up. And we've been talking a little bit about offline functionality here. There is a tool within Trout Routes that allows you to capture and download those maps so you have them available for offline use. It would be way too much data to try and capture the entire country, so that's not a possibility yet. However, I think the last time we checked, you were able to save about the size of the state of New Jersey to your device at one time if you were so inclined. But you are able to manage that data. So if you downloaded an area and you used it for a weekend, you could essentially remove that from your phone and it would not count against you. So you have the ability to sort of toggle on and off how much of that information you'd like to have at hand. But yes, you certainly do have the ability to capture everything that you have on screen and then add that to your device so you'd have that available for offline use. Good question, Jolene. Let's jump into Streamflows here. I know I've mentioned this a couple of times. The USGS resource here is this slide or this image on the right. Quite often, and if you haven't looked at this information before, what this is telling you is how fast the water is moving, how high the water is, and in many cases, if there's a thermometer, it'll show you what the temperature of the water is. However, the USGS website is a little cumbersome, and often you need to remember the name of the stream gauge when you're trying to find this information. And so what we've done with Trout Routes is we've pulled in every one of those USGS stream gauges, dropped a pin on the map so you can see where the gauge is, and then when you tap into the gauge, we're going to give you a whole bunch of information about what that data is doing. So in the screenshot on the left, at a glance, you can very quickly see whether or not that water is rising or falling, what the temperature is, and what that height is, and again, whether or not that height is rising or falling. And then if you were to tap into those data sets, we try and make that data a little bit more useful. So we'll show you some historic data that you're able to filter between day, week, month, or year. We've also plugged in historical medians, so you can see as well if the height or the flow is typical for that time of year. And then this is a brand new feature for iOS that'll be coming to the rest of the platform shortly. But NOAA just released a predictive flow forecasting tool. So this dashed yellow line is showing you what NOAA is actually predicting that water is expected to do in the coming days. So another really powerful tool to help you get a sense for what the water is doing, what it should be doing historically or according to historic data, and what it is likely to do in the near future, as well as putting that information on the map so you can see where on the body of water it's located. USGS doesn't really have these mapped out in a way that's useful or allows you to understand where gauges are in relationship to each other. So this is another really effective way that we've combined these resources into a single platform that allows you to interact with it really carefully, as well as using it as this navigational tool. Quick question here on weather. We aren't pulling in weather just yet. We figured most folks have a fairly familiar weather tool that they're plugging in. There are an awful lot of fairly simple weather data sets that are out there, but in most cases we found that anglers are pretty picky about how much detail they want to see in terms of weather. And so we don't plug in weather just yet. I think we could, but like I said, I think most folks have found something that they really trust that they use instead. So we're letting them rely on that tool rather than trying to bring that into trout routes. Let me talk a little bit about some of the other data sets that we've incorporated. So we understand the value and certainly appreciate the knowledge base of the fly shops and fly shop staff across the country. So we've plugged in just about every fly shop that we've found across the country into the app. And we have a handful of endorsed fly shops that we work more closely with, that we have connected with, that we've visited, that we've hired guides out of, that we really trust and we think are particularly knowledgeable and worth visiting. And so we've added them into the app with this little extra Trout Routes badge on their shop icon. So not only do we have every shop in the country, but we also are just about every shop in the country. We've tried to also steer you toward shops that are going to be welcoming, that have knowledgeable staff, that often provide and go above and beyond in their community by hosting educational nights or tying classes or supporting conservation efforts or other educational efforts in general. So we also really hope to steer our anglers and our users toward these additional resources, because of course we can't be on the ground across the country at all times. And so we've also spent the time to add in these resources as being, the experts in their region. So at a glance, you can see that we provide a little bit more detail for these endorsed fly shops, but we also make it very easy for you to grab driving directions, head to their website, or give them a call if you just want to get a hold of them and get a sense for the water, or ask them what flies are working well, or that sort of thing. So another very helpful resource that we threw in there to help you be as prepared and successful as possible. And so we've been talking a little bit about the personalization of these resources and how that can be a challenge. One of the things that I think is great about Trout Routes is not only are you able to use it as the tool to help you scout and educate yourself on a stretch of water, but you can also use it to capture information when you're out in the wild and come back to it later on. And so in the screenshot here on the left, this is actually a spot not far from where I'm sitting right now, here in the Driftless. And I was fishing this little stretch, and I happened to, I essentially walked right through this big brown trout, and he took off before I even had a shot at him. And so I dropped a pin, and I said, this might be worth coming back to. And so now I've got a marker that I can use to add notes. I can see exactly where it is on the map. And then later on, when I did eventually find him, I was able to drop a photo and say, yep, there's that big brown trout right under that tree, like he was supposed to be. And so here's another way that you can use your personal markers to help you add notes and curate some information ahead of time, as well as using it when you're coming back to that water. And then here on the screenshot on the right, I've used some custom markers in yellow to add some boat ramp access pins that I'd like to float at some point. So I've identified these 2 access points, and I added some additional pins. And so now I can very quickly see on the map, all right, here's where I'm going to put in, here's where I'm going to take out, and I can check the mileage between the 2. I can add notes about what the float is for, and that sort of thing. And so not only is it something that you're able to plug in and have access to offline, but you can do that research at home, and then bring it all together once you get out on the water and rely back on those markers. And again, of course, these are all private markers. We don't have access to these. We don't pull any data from them. This all stays private to your account, and it's not something that we rely on as far as sharing or distributing any of that information. There is a question here about those personal markers. Yes, if you've created your own personal markers, those are available offline. They're saved to your device. However, you can also drop pins or create markers, for example, on a desktop, and then once you load your device, if you are on cell service or on Wi-Fi, it'll pull in those points as well. So you can do some of that e-scouting on a desktop on a bigger screen, drop pins, take notes, and then load the app on your phone. And as long as you're within coverage, you'll be able to see those markers as well. So another really great way to create that interactive experience, as well as kind of that seamless connectivity between devices. There's a question here on smallmouth bass in Wisconsin. Boy, I wish we had smallmouth bass for Wisconsin, because I'm looking out at the Mississippi right now and I'm seeing fish jump all over the place. We have toyed with the idea. We hesitate because we are still committed to focusing on moving cold water and being the most efficient and useful tool for moving trout water in particular. That doesn't mean that it's not on the way and it's not coming. We've actually had a few conversations where by the end of the conversation, our GIS developer has sort of looked up from his screen and said, well, here's all the information for moving warm water in Wisconsin if you'd like it. But we are hesitating just a bit. I would expect that once Onyx Fish decides what they want to do with their moving water information, that we will start incorporating some of that at that time. It is going to be a little ways out, though, as we are, like I said, going to be focused as much as possible on moving cold water. But excellent question. And it is helpful when I have user and conversation feedback like this, because the more folks that are asking for it helps me help our developers make that decision. So please keep that coming. I am happy to hear it, and I'll do my best to make sure we keep pushing it forward. Let's talk just briefly about GPS navigation. I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but you are able to use trout routes to know where you stand, which is very critical, especially when you're looking at public and private land information. This is a function that works offline, provided you have the map downloaded ahead of time, because your GPS signal is slightly different than your cellular signal. And so if you have the map downloaded, you are able to use it to navigate, which is incredibly helpful. Now, that's not going to be the case for driving directions, of course, because you still need to have connectivity to tap into something like Google or Apple Maps. But if you're looking for your location information, you can still see your blue dot on the screen as long as you have that map downloaded ahead of time. There's a question here about sharing information between users. Yes, you can. You can, if you look at this center screenshot on this slide, there's that button to share. As long as you're in cell range, you're able to share those pins. And what happens is that just goes through SMS. And then as long as you have your Trout Routes account, you can click on that link and it'll send you to that pin right in the app. So yes, you are able to share that between users, but it's not really, I hesitate to say share, because it's not really that social component. You're not broadcasting it anywhere. You're just essentially sending it to that single user between the app. Okay, so that's great, but what about some of that other information? What about the education? What about the conservation? So let's talk a little bit about that. So we are continuing to add data sets as we come across them. One of the things that I think is really remarkable is how the lengths really that our developers will go to find some of this information. I mentioned easements earlier in the conversation. We've incorporated what I think is more easement information than any other mapping product across the country. Fishing easements, for anyone that's unfamiliar, are in some cases public land that it's been designated for additional fishing access, but there are also several easements where private landowners have agreed to allow anglers to cross their private land boundary and access water if that's what they're there for. And in many cases, these easements and this information is not really saved in a national database, and it's not broadcast particularly widely. And so often you need to go down to the county level, connecting with county libraries or county clerks to figure out where and when these easements have been put into place. And so our developers have gone to that length to really help find all of that information. I think at last count, it was over 4,000, maybe even 4,200 specific easement polygons that they essentially have to hand draw to incorporate them into the app. So you have access to quite a bit more additional access information that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it is quite remarkable once you're able to see, where these easements show up. And again, if you were to scroll all the way back up, and I won't make you do that now, but that slide that had access information on it, that polygon that was in purple, that purple shape on the river, was showing you that access information. And so it could be another really powerful way to help find those additional access opportunities that you might otherwise not really be able to find elsewhere. A slight typo here. This is 2023. I forgot what year it was. It's actually 2024, of course. But we are steadfastly committed to conservation, inclusivity, and accessibility. And so one of the things that we do, in addition to providing all this information about where you can fish, what the water is doing, where the land boundaries are, where the access points are, is really making sure that we are supporting our partners that help us connect our users with these fishing opportunities, as well as the importance of these resources, and helping them find ways to learn more about them, become better anglers, become more responsible anglers, and help support the fisheries that we all are taking advantage of when we're out on the water. And so I'll just briefly touch on a few of them here tonight. If you want to hit the next slide. So accessibility, BHA is a national organization that really focuses on public land access. They've been mostly hunting focused, or at least have quite a few more members who are hunting focused than angling focused. However, they're trying to help support more anglers. And one of the ways that we're supporting them is by providing our resources to them to help them connect with anglers across the country. So we're in the process of incorporating BHA riparian restoration work project opportunities. And so we're helping to direct our users to those restoration sites, find quick links to register to those projects so that they can go out and they can help in their region. But then also, to make sure that we're connecting our users with resources that help them understand access rights, access laws, and even get involved on a national level to make sure that they understand what's going on in their communities as far as public land and public water access. So they've been one of our core partners from the beginning, and it's been really exciting to work with them this year to help find more ways to bring more awareness to all the restoration work that they do across the country. Like I mentioned, we were very pleased and excited to connect with Heather about a year and a half ago with United Women on the Fly, and supported a few of the fish and hang experiences with some scholarship support for a handful of those anglers. And so we were more than happy to continue that this year, and it's been really exciting to see how iFishiBelong has grown to include United Women on the Fly and the rest of those partners. And so really, again, being a resource to help provide some awareness to the opportunities that iFishiBelong and United Women on the Fly have for their members. And then show up like we are tonight by talking a little bit about what we do and sharing our experience, and then fielding questions and helping everyone feel confident and successful on the water. So I'm very happy and thrilled that we're able to continue that relationship. And if you haven't gone to a fish and hang weekend, I haven't personally. I've only lived vicariously through what I've seen on social media and how we've recapped after the events. But they are incredible events, and I can't recommend them enough because I know the folks that are helping lead those events, and I've heard absolutely nothing but amazing things. And so if you're on the fence, let me give my plug and my recommendation. You should absolutely check them out. They're a great way to learn. They're a great way to connect with other anglers, and really just be more confident on the water. So for trout routes here, it's certainly important for the long-term health of angling, I think, in everyone's community. But we're absolutely appreciative of all the work that you are doing. And again, if we can be a microphone to help spread awareness and create some more exposure, that's what we're hoping to do here. So very, very pleased to be able to do that. There's a question here on the iFishiBelong discount. I will shoot Mary a link. We changed our sign-up process just a little bit, so I will send Mary a link that she can distribute to the group, but we'd be happy to send that information out. It'll be fairly easy. I'll send a hyperlink, and you can click on that link. It'll have the discount applied already, and all you need to do is sign up via that link, so we're happy to do that. Another quick question about Forest Service road data sets. There are some in there. That's a really good question. I don't know if that's on the radar or not. I'm certainly happy to forward that along to our development team. I know we are thinking about some of the other data sets that Onyx has developed in terms of their existing platforms, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's an opportunity there for us to bring in some of that info. But excellent question. We don't really incorporate them now, but there are certainly plenty of Forest Service roads that could be useful resources to help you get to fishable water. So excellent question. And then Sarah had a question a little ways up about a stretch of water in Wisconsin. That's an excellent point. We are really, really focused on that moving cold water. So there are some waterways that are not going to show up because they may not be year-round trout habitat rivers. I actually live on a river here in Wisconsin that certainly has trout in it, but it's pretty muddy and murky most of the year, and it doesn't really hold trout for very long. And so we've chosen to omit it in an effort to really direct folks to those trout fishing opportunities. Now, if we think about how we are potentially going to incorporate some of that warm water down the road, yes, certainly those will be incorporated, or perhaps, how things develop between us and Onyx Fish is likely when that sort of transition might happen. But that's a good point. There are some waterways that you may be familiar with that have trout in them that aren't going to show up, and the reason for that is because they either may not be year-round trout habitat, or they may be more of that warm water fishery that we've chosen to omit for those reasons I mentioned already. I'll throw out a quick plug for Trout Unlimited. They are one of our conservation partners, both on a national and a local level. We have some great relationships with the folks that we've gotten to know very closely here near the Twin Cities, as well as where we've been able to connect with them across the country. We have incorporated a number of those habitat restoration sites into the app, so you can see where some of that habitat restoration work has happened. But we're also really excited to help promote some of those new and upcoming restoration opportunities. So connecting our users with their local chapters, as well as some of those restoration opportunities, is another way that we're helping to steer our users toward not only resources that help care for these areas, but also some of those opportunities that are right in their backyard. And I'll mention this one here briefly. This is a brand new partnership for us. So as we are committed to providing access, we've gotten to know the folks over at Rare Waters quite a bit over the last year and a half, who are focused on helping anglers connect with additional access opportunities. So they have a network of private landowners that they work with. So think of this sort of like Airbnb for additional trout fishing opportunities. These are access sites where you can register and book for access via their platform. But we are really excited to be working with them because not only is it providing even more access opportunities, but it is allowing us to connect with another community of folks in the sort of tech space and the mapping space that we think are doing a great job to connect their users with their partners. And they've got great relationships with Trout Unlimited, with other fly shops. Mostly they're based in Colorado, and so these access points for now are really focused sort of on that Western Rockies until they expand further. But we think that aligning with folks like this allows us to share more information about access in general, but also to really increase that awareness of the importance of these waterways, and really, like I mentioned, advocate with these like-minded tech partners, because in our opinion, technology really isn't going anywhere, and so we are striving to be the most responsible organization in the space so that we can set the example and we can be connecting our anglers with as many resources as possible, to ensure the health and the longevity of these resources and environments.
I know you answered a lot of questions along the way. I think we got to everything. I was trying to jump back and forth as well. I appreciate your time, Eric.
Yeah, if I miss something, please call it out, and I'm happy
to. Good
job
in double tasking.
I have my contact on the presentation. I'll make sure that that's available to everyone as well. I'm more than happy to be a resource for the presentation, or if there's something else that you have questions on, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, it was a pleasure to connect with you all. I know that was a lot of information all at once, and so as things come up in the next couple of days or weeks even, please reach out. I would be happy to address them.
Awesome.
Yeah, Tammy, that's a good point. So all of these features are part of Trout Routes Pro. There is a free version. So Trout Routes, the app, is free to download. Trout Routes Pro is really where all of this useful data is housed, and then that's part of our annual subscription product. Normally that is $58.99, but you get access for the entire year and to the entire country. Some of the other Onyx products are, state-based or more locally based. We try to keep it simple and just open it up to the entire country. And I believe we're doing a 20% discount for iFishiBelong members. So I'll make sure that information gets to the group as well. So that, ends up coming out to about $47. I like to think of that as a reasonable trip to the fly shop if I'm lucky. So,
lucky.
If you've ever walked into a fly shop and walked out without spending more than $50, I think you're doing pretty good. So for about the same cost, we think it's fairly reasonable to provide the level of detail and data that we do for water across the country. So I would love for you all to check it out. You do have the ability to kind of take it for a test spin before you commit to the full year. But would love any other additional feedback that you all have as you continue to dig into it. And we're very happy and proud to be a supporter of iFishiBelong, and appreciate the partnership and for all these opportunities. Like I had mentioned at the beginning, we've given a number of these sorts of presentations, but I always like connecting with anglers because I get a sense of some communities that I'm not directly part of or I'm not connected to all the time. And so it's always wonderful to meet some other like-minded fishy folks and share maps and cool data about maps that I think is really awesome. So thank you for the time.
I learned something new every time, Eric. I've listened to your presentation a couple times, and I'm like, oh, yes, I forgot about that, or oh, wow, I didn't ever use that. So I appreciate you bringing, and the partnership with Trout Routes again. Yeah, the last year and a half has been awesome. Particularly on the scholarships, we've been able to provide some access to folks, particular educational events. So it's been really great.
Excellent. Well, please keep me in the loop if there's anything else that we can do for you all. Like I said, we're more than thrilled to be working with you, and I'm happy to keep these presentations coming. There's an awful lot of data in there, and we're always excited to continue to dig it. Oh, and yes, Jolene has a question about YouTube. Our YouTube channel is a fantastic resource. We have been doing some masterclass deep dives over the last year. And so we put those recordings up on the YouTube channel for you to check out after the fact. But I would say if you're curious, that's a wonderful resource. But if you sign up for our newsletter, we also send out about one email a month,
Mm.
kind of touching on app updates and recaps, as well as some upcoming opportunities for those masterclass programs or conversations. And so those are another really great resource if you'd like to sort of sit in on a conversation about some specific features, or if you just want to sort of get a sense for how you might approach a particular technique, or if you wanted to learn more about e-scouting. We kind of cover all sorts of topics on that program. But then, yes, if you head back to the YouTube channel, that's another fantastic resource as well.
Great question. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We're also recording this, so we'll make sure that the recording is distributed as well, whether it be on YouTube or another channel. Okay. All right, everyone. Have a great evening. Appreciate your time. See you out on the water.
All right. Have a fantastic season, everyone.
Yes. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.